We live in an age of the democratization of media. Forums like YouTube allow creators a way to create content, whereas not that many years ago, these forums were limited to television and radio media, industries that were extremely difficult to break into and find success. Now, anyone can try their hand at creating content, merely by opening up a YouTube channel, and, at its most basic, investing a small amount of money into equipment and then running with it. As YouTube has matured, however, very high-quality channels, easily on level with television, have come into existence. In particular is the arena of science communication, of which I am a small part. My guest today, Joe Scott, has been doing it a lot longer as host of Answers with Joe, a channel dedicated to science with a comedic twist, and other subjects that Joe finds of interest.
Welcome to Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Joining John today is fellow YouTuber Joe Scott. With over 421,000 subscribers, Joe creates new perspectives of the world and the universe on his channel Answers with Joe.
Joe Scott, welcome to the program.
Cool, thanks for having me.
Now, Joe, you're a pretty prominent guy on YouTube these days, and you do one of the more eclectic channels in I suppose the science arena, where you mix comedy with interesting stories and science. What led you down that path? When you started YouTube, what did you intend to do?
Not science. It was really more of a comedy thing in the beginning. I come from a screenwriting and a comedy background. I did a little bit of stand-up. I would not call myself a stand-up comic because that's disrespectful to actual stand-ups, but I did kind of dabble in it. And I just kind of realized that it wasn't the lifestyle that I really wanted. And at the time I was working a full-time job. So, it's difficult when you go to do an open mic and you don't get up on stage until 1 a.m. and the only people there are other comics that have all heard your stuff already. And then, you got to get up and go to work the next morning. So that was challenging. And I made a film about 2004, 2005, I guess is when it kind of made its festival rounds. And I did the very first thing I ever uploaded to the channel was the trailer to that film. And it had nothing to do with science. It wasn't science fiction or anything. It was a chick flick for guys is what I called it. YouTube was a revelation at the time because I had this trailer that I had made for the movie. And at the time, the only way to send it out to festivals and stuff was to just compress it down really small and put it in an email, attach it to an email. And I put all this time and work and effort into it, and I didn't want it to be the size of a postage stamp. So then this YouTube thing came up, and it was like, oh, I could upload there and then just share a link. That was groundbreaking at the time. So to this day, if you look at the very back of my channel, the very first thing I uploaded was the trailer to that movie. And then after that, I just kind of did some vlogging, talking head kind of videos where I talked about, kind of promoted the movie and gave some stories from behind the scenes and stuff like that. And I just really liked it. After a while, like I said, I did the comedy thing and it just wasn't working. So I was like, maybe I could just kind of do that on YouTube. Maybe that would scratch all the itches. I did it off and on for a while. In the beginning, it was called Ask Joe. And it was really more of just a fun thing I did with my friends on Facebook. I would take questions from them and then just respond with jokes mostly. Like they weren't ever taken seriously. And I would do anywhere from 5, 7, sometimes more questions each video. And then there were a couple where I actually answered the question without being a sarcastic douche. They seemed to do a little bit better. And then so it kind of became, there was one that I did that was only one question instead of 5 or so. And that seemed to do a little bit better. And I would get burnt out and frustrated and I would stop. And then 6 months later, I would get the itch again and start doing it again. And eventually in around 2014, I just decided to get serious about it and said, I'm just going to put out a video every Monday, even if it's just me, looking into my phone and going, hey guys. And so when I started doing that and got serious about it and consistent about it, a lot of things changed. I started to grow an audience. It was a very eclectic, weird, all kinds of different topics channel. I made the mistake of covering politics a couple of times. And then there was a video on the Fermi paradox, which you're more than familiar with. And I just listed these 10 solutions, possible solutions to the Fermi paradox. And it was all taken from a Wait But Why article, really. For whatever reason, Google smiled on it, and that's the first video that kind of did well. So I got a lot of subscribers that were into that kind of topic. So they started asking questions along that line. And next thing you know, it kind of became a science channel. So, I was always a little bit of a nerd growing up. I had the space shuttle on my wall. I share a birthday with Albert Einstein. So, it was all kind of there, but I was always more interested in humor and comedy. So just kind of found a way of meshing it together.
Yeah, and it works really well because that's what gives your channel uniqueness, is the sort of presentation of the material. And I guess to some extent me as well with my channel. Doing a similar YouTube channel to what you do, you must spend a lot of time researching. How much research goes into that?
I probably don't spend as much time as people think, especially these days. So my out whenever I'm covering a subject that is just totally over my head, which many of them are, is I fall back on that, hey, I'm just a comedy channel kind of thing, which may not be fair, but it's important to me that I get the facts right. I'm not blasé about the facts, and I'm not interested in spreading misinformation by any means. I've always been more interested in just making it entertaining and making it something that people would want to look further into. Like I always say, I'm the appetizer to the entree. So it's like maybe that I'm covering a subject that people have never thought of before, never heard of before. And then that might spur them to look into some of the links that I put in the description, and they go and look further. And maybe some of the links they go to and some of the stuff they find maybe contradicts what I'm talking about. But at least I got them interested in the subject, That's really what I've come to focus on, I guess.
So the introductory video to an entire subject matter. Now, how do you find these subjects? Because you have a huge variety of stuff. Is it just something you happen to be interested in at the moment and just go with it? Or is there a plan? How do you do it?
Oh, there's no plan. I guarantee you there's no plan. I get a lot of requests and comments for different stuff. I get a lot of stuff there that I'm just like, oh, I've never heard of that, and then I'll go look it up, and if I find it interesting, then I'll talk about it. I also have a pretty big Patreon group right now. They're really active, and can't do it without them. I'm like totally indebted to those guys, but they're always sharing ideas and topics with me. But in terms of like which ones I pick, I mean, there's the bulk of potential topics, and then there's the ones that I actually pick. Honestly, it's really a gut thing. One of the biggest struggles I had earlier on in the channel was kind of coming to grips with the idea that whatever it is I'm doing, people like it. I would say sometimes that like we all have the trolls and we have the negative comments and stuff on YouTube, but really what messed me up more than anything were the positive ones.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like I would get these comments from people that are like, oh, your channel has changed my life. And that's, stuff like that. Well, that really kind of gets into me because suddenly I can't just like make a video that gives somebody a chuckle. It has to change somebody's life, So for a while, my channel actually kind of struggled, or I feel like it struggled because I put too much weight on everything. And I had to kind of step back and kind of be like, look, let's not overthink this and don't take this too seriously. Whatever reason people have for liking what you do, it's kind of out of your control. So just do you,
Yeah.
And trust that whatever it is you're doing, they're going to like it. So I say all that to kind of say that like I kind of go with my gut. Like if I'm okay. So for example, the other day I did a video, or a couple weeks ago, on the rare earth hypothesis. And it literally stemmed from, I was working on a completely different video, and then I was driving somewhere and I was listening to a podcast where this was being talked about, and just started like spurring all these thoughts and ideas and connections in my mind. And it just kind of like, it gave me that charge, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go with it. And so I went home and I immediately wrote something out and I recorded it. I just kind of have to trust that if I find it interesting, my audience will find it interesting. So I kind of just go with my gut on those things.
What are your thoughts on the rare earth hypothesis? You think it's likely, or do you think it's actually unlikely?
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One is that it's like we're a rare earth in the sense that like nothing else like it could exist ever anywhere. I don't think that's likely, but I think that maybe one of the reasons we haven't seen any evidence out there of other us's is because there is a very specific set of circumstances that are required for intelligent life like us to spring up, and it's just not going to happen all that often. I guess to answer your question, I think it is a thing that there's a lot more that goes into us happening than maybe we've considered in the past, but I don't think that it's so strong that it's like we're the only ones out there.
Yeah, my own view dovetails. I think that intelligence is probably rare, and it doesn't always exist at the same time. So there may have been something in the past or something in the future within the Milky Way, but we may be the only ones right now. And
exactly. Yeah, actually, the time thing that kind of changed my mind on it more than anything. Is the time thing. Like I think in the video actually I talked about, like, if you can imagine the galaxy with just a whole bunch of like flashing Christmas lights around it, like those are the intelligent civilizations that just pop up and die off just constantly throughout the life of the galaxy, but never at the same time, you know.
Right.
Rarely at the same time.
And that in itself is another solution to the Fermi paradox, is that if you know, civilizations, once they reach a certain level of technological development, they go extinct. You know, they develop nuclear weapons and go that way, or they develop general artificial intelligence and it kills them, or whatever, what have you. So that, again, with, like you said, with the Christmas tree lights, they come into existence and then go away, but never coincide. Or if they do coincide, they're very distant from each other. But then when you look at the mathematics of it, you know, the just enormous amounts of galaxies, all full of stars, all surrounded by even more planets, there's got to be another Earth, I think. But it's just simply rare. And
we'll probably never get to it.
We'll probably never get to it. And the thing is that, you know, planets change, you know. In billions of years, this planet will not look like this. And, you know, eventually it'll just be a rock like Mars.
Yeah. Planets change and stars die. And that was kind of one of the points I made in the video, was it might just be that interstellar travel is just not possible. Like I mean, we like to think of these future, you know, warp drive scenarios and stuff like that, but what if it's just not something that can be done, like physically can't be done, you know?
Or it's simply too expensive, you know. You're like, well, I could go to this star system 10 light years away and expend all this energy to get there just to find a planet that maybe I could terraform. And you know, you start to wonder if it's actually more efficient, and the reason that we don't see giant galactic spanning Type 3 civilizations is because there's no point to it. And it's better just to stay home and, you know, use your resources as best you can, and, you know, maybe go to the few nearest star systems, but fundamentally just stick around. Especially in case if you have just, you know, you've got your one star system with your one planet that's really nice, but you don't have anything like it within 1,000 light years. You know, there's nothing you can do. You know, you're surrounded by ice shell moons and gas giants and just stuff you can't use. So that would also limit expansion into the galaxies. There's just nowhere to go that you could use practically. But but it does, I mean, at the same time, a civilization that stays at home is probably going to get pretty crazy with, you know, habitats and everything else around their star system, which is a technosignature and maybe could be detected by SETI. Now, so is that your suspicion, though, that Earth is just simply rare? That's ultimately what you think the deal is with the Fermi paradox, right?
I think that's part of it, yeah.
Now, other parts. There's also things like natural disasters and things like that, where, you know, you get hit by an asteroid or comet like Earth has in the past, and that ends your civilization, or you get hit with a gamma ray burst or something along those lines. Do you see us surviving? You know, do you think the human civilization is going to be here in 1,000 years?
Oh man, my channel has taken a really dark turn lately, because I've been talking about subjects like that, and I think it's sort of, it's a razor's edge here, because on one side you have people that seem oblivious to the possibility that we could ever possibly go extinct. You know, we have this very limited lifespans, very limited species span, really, in the great scheme of things, and we think that it just kind of goes on forever because that's our personal experience of it. But, you know, 99.9% of species that have ever existed on the planet have gone extinct. Like that's normal. You know. And so, like, on one hand, I'm kind of baffled by the fact that people just don't even see that as a possibility when it's very, very likely. On the other side of that, is the fatalists that, you're kind of seeing this now with some of the climate change talk out there, is people that are kind of like, yeah, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so we might as well just use up all our resources and party. And it's really, it's a frightening scenario that, like, people seem to either fall on one or the other side of that. And it's like, no, we have to we have to be aware that this is a possibility, and we've got to get creative and find ways to get past it if it's possible. We got to understand that it's a very likely possibility that, as you said, in 1,000 years we might not be here. And we got to start preparing for that now, or preparing solutions to that. But the problem is, when you start talking about it, people do get that fatalistic streak and just go like, oh well, whatever, I'm gonna go have a drink. So I have been kind of going down that path a little more lately, and I've actually had some people commenting on it. It's like, man, your channel should be called Existential Angst with Joe instead of Answers with Joe.
Nice.
But I think it's stuff that kind of needs to be talked about, and needs to be put out there, and people need to be made aware of.
It really does, and I actually take a positive view towards it. I think that we could actually solve problems like climate change. As we increasingly get deeper into it, it gets harder, but we do have certain technological possibilities that we might be able to employ to, drop the temperature of the planet. But at the same time, I get the same thing of, fatalistic viewpoints that it doesn't really matter. I think it actually does, because for me, a civilization being rare is one of the most special things in the universe. It's sort of conceited perhaps to say that. But at some point we have to recognize that we're actually something that's rare in the universe and probably worth saving. On that note, when we come back, we will get into the future and assume that we do survive and take a look at what that's like. Along with a more near-term future, we'll talk about Elon Musk and Tesla and SpaceX. So we'll be back in a moment. Thanks for listening. Wrong channel for that. Anyway, I'm currently announcing a special event. During next week's episode, we will be doing a premiere where not only I will be in the chat during the episode premiere for Q&A, but I'll also be joined by next week's guest, David Kipping of Columbia University, where we'll field audience questions about all things astrobiology, exoplanets, and his new paper on the Halo Drive. See you at the premiere next Thursday. And we're back with Joe Scott of Answers with Joe. Now, Joe, we were talking about going extinct, but let's say we don't. Let's say we somehow muddle through and we enter a new human future, which to me seems like we are on the cusp of a complete paradigm change of what it means to be human. And you've covered some of these things on your channel. For example, the man with no heartbeat, where you have a prosthetic heart that keeps you alive until you can get a transplant, but eventually you get to a level of technology where the heart is better than what nature actually creates. And you start getting into the superhuman, type things where, you have Pistorius and people like this that are outperforming athletes, with biological limbs, with their prosthetic limbs.
Yeah.
Where do you see the human future going, providing we survive? What do you think will change the most?
So yeah, in the artificial heart video, I was really struck by this one particular guy who had, I'm probably screwing it up now. It's like a vascular assist device, a VAD, I think is what it's called. And he didn't have a heartbeat. Like, it just kind of continually pumped blood through his body. And so that was kind of making the joke. It's like, well, of course he's a good athlete. Well, that was the thing. He was also an athlete. He was like a bodybuilder, and he had this like artificial heart. So that gets rid of all my excuses for why I'm not at the gym right now. But the joke in the video was, well, my beating heart can't compete with that constant flow of blood he's got going. And it kind of did get me started thinking. It's like, well, what if we're able to actually improve on what we've got right now? I think that material science has a way to go before it can be at the same level as, what our tissues can do. I mean, it's kind of a genius system that we got going on in our body with the way that the cells, die off and get replaced, and it's constantly being renewed. I think that we'd have to find ways of doing that, which is a pretty difficult thing to do. Yeah, the whole transhumanism thing is interesting. And there are these like hacker guys that are like experimenting on themselves and implanting chips in their bodies and whatnot. Then you get into things like Neuralink and brain implants and our ability to actually like just download information online into our brains or communicate telepathically. I mean, these are actual things that people are talking about. I did a video on the brain implant thing, and there's I think these all start with solving the problems of people who are disabled or have some kind of body limitations right now. Because there are these guys that don't have any arms, but now they've got these prosthetic arms that can actually control them with their thoughts. That's actually a thing that they're able to do. And you mentioned, Oscar Pistorius is the same kind of thing. It's like it starts as something that helps out people that are missing legs, but then it turns out with these, artificial legs, they can run faster than everybody else. And so I think that's the kind of the direction that these things go, is they start with people who are disabled and it kind of just gets them to a normal life. But then it's like, oh, we could take that even further and give it to somebody who has a normal functioning body, but it improves on that. It's the brain implants, I think, that really stand out to me, that would really just completely redefine what it means to be a human at that point.
Sure, you get to where you're implanting a PhD into your head. Just
totally,
overnight, you're all of a sudden you hold a PhD in physics. And if someone would have said to me 5 years ago that would be on the horizon, I'd have said, I don't think so. But lately, I mean, it seems to be making leaps and bounds. And that maybe we're not that far from it. I mean, I don't expect it within 20 years, but eventually. And that brings into, questions like superintelligence, where, you have basically an overclocked human brain that's just heavily augmented and with an IQ of 300, something like that. Which is an alternative to, artificial intelligence being super intelligent, where you have a, nightmare scenario, James Cameron type thing, where it, tries to wage an existential war against the human civilization.
Yeah.
But in the end, if humans augment themselves, I often wonder, at what point are we no longer human? At what point do we change the name of the species that we're so augmented? And people seem receptive to it. Look at how many people are willing to undergo body modifications and tattoos and things like that in today's world. So I think a lot of people will be receptive to it, but you might end up with a situation where you have one group of people that are normal, regular humans, Homo sapiens, and then you have another group that are something else that are a lot smarter. And that gets a little scary if you think about it, where you begin splitting
and it
things.
Gets into all kinds of society issues where you start to ask, well, what if only wealthy people can afford the upgrade? And then you wind up with two different classes of people, one that has this like almost superhuman ability, and then the regular humans that are like living underground or something. You get this bifurcation. Is that the right word?
I think so, yeah.
Of society. And one thing that always sticks out to me is when I talk about subjects like that, you always get these people in the comments, I would never, ever, ever get something implanted in my brain. I would never do that. And I'm like, yeah, you probably would. If everybody else was doing it, and if you were falling behind and like say you couldn't get a job because you were the only applicant that didn't have this, yeah, you would do it. That's how these things work. That's how it's always worked.
Right, and a lot of stuff, it's ridiculously useful, and you could actually say this has already happened with the cell phone, because
yeah, exactly.
People that would have said, no, I don't want any calls when I'm out. I want to be left alone, and I'll keep a landline. Those people now have cell phones because you just can't function without one today. It's very difficult to function without one today.
Well, and people make that argument that we're already kind of cyborgs. We're just not, it's not implanted into our bodies, but we are already like melding with technology in that way through our cell phones.
Absolutely, and one could call a cell phone a brain prosthetic. Essentially, that's what it is. It's just not implanted in your head yet, but I
like that.
But it will be, at some point.
I'm just gonna start calling my phone my prosthetic brain from now on.
There you go. But we have to take another break. Everybody check out Joe's channel, Answers with Joe on YouTube, and like, subscribe, and etc. to this one. We'll be back in a moment.
If you'd like to support Event Horizon, you'll be pleased to know we've recently launched a Patreon. Link in the description below. Or alternatively, you can use your cellular telephone to scan the assemblage of squares on screen now. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. And now, back to John.
And we're back with Joe Scott. Now, Joe, we were talking about Bigelow and, the initiatives, private initiatives to essentially conquer space. And chief among those people that are doing that's Elon Musk with his, Mars colony plan and everything else. but he also owns Tesla, and he's sort of rethinking how, transport here on Earth. You own a Tesla. Do you like it?
I like it more the longer I have it, yeah.
I've been thinking about eventually getting one, and, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's, you have to pull a trigger. And have you found it difficult to basically charge it up or anything, or do you have to rethink how you drive, or is it just so superior to a regular automobile that it's just doesn't matter?
It's a little bit of both, honestly, because on one hand it's just a car, and it's funny because like I've gotten used to it now, and it's just my car now. But every once in a while I'll talk to friends and they'll kind of give me this whole like I don't know, they treat it like it's a spaceship or something. And they ask questions about it, and I'm kind of like it's just my car. you know it still sort of has a, like, I want to use the word stigma, because I guess to some people it is a stigma, but it's got this aura, whatever you want to call it. It's got this idea around it that it's this like super high tech supercar kind of thing. But what I like the most about it is it's not necessarily that. It's just a car. When you ask about charging and stuff, when I first got it, all I had was just a regular outlet in my wall in the garage. Now, luckily, I do have a garage and it's not full of junk, and I do park in it. No, all I had was a regular 110 outlet that you would plug, a desk lamp into, and that worked for several months. And eventually, I upgraded to a 240 volt, like you would plug your dryer into. So the deal with the 110 outlet is you kind of have to leave it plugged in all the time. But even that wasn't a big deal. You pull up in your garage and you just plug your car in and you go inside. It charges really slowly. It might take 24 hours to charge up completely, but I work from home. I don't actually put a whole lot of miles on my car. And so, I would go out and run some errands, come back, plug my car in, and it's still full, Now that I got this 240 volt outlet, it can charge the whole car in 4 or 5 hours. So still, it's an overnight thing, and I only charge it up maybe once a week. So it is a little bit more planning involved if you're doing a road trip, but I can't speak for everybody else, but I only take a road trip a few times a year, one that's of any real length. I will say that the reason I went with the Tesla specifically over, say, a Leaf or something like that was because it's the only car that gets over 300 miles of range, and I live in Texas, and my family is really spread out. So whenever I do go see them, I need to be able to make those distances. And really, this was the least expensive car in the world that could make those distances on electricity. But the thing that I tell people that I think the biggest, I guess, mindset shift that's required for an electric car is it kind of becomes more like a phone. It's really like a giant phone on wheels, in the sense that you don't have to take your phone somewhere to refuel it. I think it's just so ingrained in our heads that a car is something that you take to a gas station and you pump it full of stuff. But this kind of just flips that on its head, and it says, no, you just plug it in wherever you are. And 90% of the time or more, you're at home. If you're at work, and if you're lucky, there's a charging outlet somewhere at work. I mean, the infrastructure does definitely still need to be built out. It's still not ideal for somebody who, say, has to park on the street and lives in an apartment or something like that. And honestly, if I had all the money in the world right now, I would invest it in infrastructure, just going around to apartment complexes and office buildings and just setting up charging places there. And the thing about it is that the infrastructure, this is one of the things I get really bullish about when it comes to electric cars. The infrastructure of putting up a charging station is literally like you could attach it to a light pole. In fact, there are some people that are doing this. They're just putting plug-in stations at light poles in parking lots because electricity is already going through it. Compare that to, say, putting up a gas station where you have to buy some land, you got to dig out the ground and put these giant tanks in there, you got to build a building, you got to maintain that, and you got to have the trucks constantly refilling it and stuff. It's just the infrastructure is so much easier to set up with electricity. I'm going off on a tangent now, but the experience of driving this car has been great. And the over-the-air updates, I think, is kind of a game changer. For example, I just did an over-the-air update last week, and they were actually able to increase the range. It went from 310 miles max to 325. And it got like a little bit like 5% more power. And I can actually feel it. Like when I get in my car, I forget about it. And then I hit the gas. It's like, whoa, it's got a little bit more punch to it all of a sudden. Just because they've been able over the last year to find efficiencies and find more ways of going between the battery and the motor and just doing a better job of that. And they can do all that through software.
That's amazing. They're fine tuning it. Now, you mentioned one thing that's kind of interesting, the mystique of the Tesla. Now, that's
the word.
Yeah, the mystique. And it doesn't help that Elon Musk launched one into space, so the only human-built motor vehicle in space is a Tesla. So it's just he sort of creates that mystique. Is what I'm getting at, and it's the same with SpaceX. SpaceX is just look at their spacesuits. How sleek and attractive they are compared to a moon suit. To get back to space science, or more accurately, let's get back to your channel. Now, when you cover these topics, these things like, an example would be Phineas Gage, the guy that had a blasting rod go through his head. And
had a very bad day.
Had a very bad day, but ended up having an all right life as a result. Or not as a result, but despite. Despite, yeah. What is your favorite odd story like that you've covered? What one stands out?
Phineas Gage one is a good one. And the reason, so I always try to find some side reason why it's interesting or try to bring it back into a science or learning concept in some way. And the thing about Phineas Gage, for anybody listening who doesn't know who that is, he was a railroad worker who, this is what, 1870 or something like that?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, in Vermont. He was tamping down, I cannot believe people used to do this, it's insane. They would drill holes in the rock, put the dynamite or powder or whatever in there, and then tamp it down with a rod, and then put the charge in and blow it up. Well, he was tamping it down with that rod, and it's created a spark down in that hole, blew up, and blew the rod through his head. And apparently it flew like 20 feet behind him, like it went straight through his head, and he survived somehow. So all that is like nice and gory and gross. And there were some details in there that even I didn't know until I really looked into it, and it was like, oh, it's so gross. But through these little horrible happy accidents, we found out how the brain works, because this one particular part of his brain was blown through, and it affected his personality in a certain way. And there were all these different other accidents, and maybe people having strokes and stuff like that shut down different parts of the brain. And that's kind of how we figured out the brain's physiology and what controls what. So it's a learning thing, but it's also really gross and people like gross. So that's why the Phineas Gage one I thought was fun and interesting. And I do try to pull that sort of element into all of these. I might actually have to pull up my channel and just kind of like look through and see which ones kind of stuck out. I'm always fascinated by like the way medicine was done back in the day. It's so horrifying.
It really is, because it was a sort of trial and error, and there was a lot of error, and there was also there was a lot of error, and there was also a lot of quackery, where people would basically just bottle up some ridiculous, drug or chemical and call it a cure-all and sell it on the street corner, when in fact it was probably detrimental to people's health to actually take it.
Oh yeah.
And then the further back in time you go, the worse it is, because you get back into, the Black Death and cures that aren't cures, and things that are actually kill the kill the patient as opposed to cure the disease. Which is one of the interesting things about the modern age, is we seem to be past that. And while there's still a little bit of that, where people try to sell cures for something that aren't cures, fundamentally we are curing disease, or at least controlling it these days. And the further we go in time, the more targeted this is going to be. And that's one of the more interesting things is that, yes, we're creating prosthetics, and we're facing ethical questions about, when does a prosthetic become an augmentation? but we're also really solving a lot of problems for people too. These, like, you see biotic arms and things like that, the mind controlled ones, and it's just so much better than what people had 100 years ago. So fundamentally, I think we're moving in a positive direction. And I hope that's the case with, human civilization in general, where we actually do survive and we're still here in 1,000 years in whatever form. But,
Yeah.
Ultimately it's a lottery, ultimately
Yeah.
it's just a lottery. And on that note,
Well, something for me,
yeah,
if I can just say this real
yeah,
quick, something for me that has really stuck out as I've done this channel for 4 years now. It's funny because I don't consider myself an expert really on any of these subjects, but when you cover enough of it over time, you kind of start to have your perception changed a little bit. And I started to just think more about just the bigger picture and looking back over species-wide time and geologic time and you hear about the singularity quite a bit. And I get all these people asking, like, when do you think the singularity is going to happen? And there's some people saying 2045, some people saying sooner than that, 2030 something. And my feeling on that has changed over time to saying that we're in the singularity right now. When you look at the big picture of things, when you look at how humans have kind of lived for the last 10,000 years, and then you look at just simply looking at population growth, and then you could tack a whole lot of other metrics on top of that. But starting about 150 years ago or so, maybe you could go back 200 years. I mean, everything changed. Everything goes right off the charts. And we're right in the middle of that right now. So, we think of the singularity as this moment, this event, this thing that's going to happen and just transform the entire species and humanity and the planet and the galaxy. But I really think it's something, it's more of a process, and it's something that we're in the middle of. And we're really, really lucky to get to be here on this planet at this point in time.
Oh, I agree.
That's the way I've started looking at it now.
Yeah, to add to that, if you went back to 1780 and you asked a person what would their future look like, what do they think the future's going to be, they wouldn't have predicted cell phones. They wouldn't have predicted satellites and everything that we have. And I think when we look at the singularity, the whole point is everything becomes incomprehensible, but I think it's going to become incomprehensible before that, where 30 years from now, we'll have things that people are not envisioning right now yet. And
one of the, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like one of the videos that I did do that was a lot of fun and really eye-opening was, I looked back, it's been 25 years now since AT&T did this campaign called the You Will campaign. Do you remember this?
I do.
Yeah. So they were like, have you ever gotten into your home without needing a key? Have you ever, paid a toll without having to stop, and that kind of thing? And then at the end, it was always, you will, and the company that will bring it to you is AT&T. And it was Tom Selleck's voice, I realized later. But anyway, I kind of revisited those commercials. They're all on YouTube, obviously. And I looked at them. And the point of the video was to say, like, now that we're 25 years later, how close did they get to what the world is going to be? And future predictions are always super interesting to me to look back 50, 100 years or more and see how they think the world is going to progress, because it's really more of a reflection of that time and what's going on at that time and what the social priorities are at the time. But anyway, the AT&T commercials, the thing that got me was, like, there's a lot of things that they got really close, but it was just implemented differently. Because somehow AT&T of all people, they didn't see cell phones being a thing. They had in the videos, it was like, have you ever tucked in your bed or tucked in your kid from 1,000 miles away or something like that, and it's somebody at a payphone that has a video screen, and that was something that kind of stuck out to me. It was like a lot of these were, people would go to a library and sit at a desk and be able to take a class in India or something. They didn't foresee that all of that would be literally something you could put in your pocket. Like, all of those things that they think you would have to go to a certain place to do it, it's just mobile and it's in your hand. And that was only 25 years ago, So it's just interesting that the things that they saw coming, and the one transformative technology that they missed that changed everything and made all of their all of their predictions off, you know? And I think there's something now that we don't know about that's going to come in 10 or 15, 20 years, maybe sooner, that are going to just blow all of our predictions out of the water the same way. And that gets exciting to me. That question mark out there. What's that thing that's going to change everything that's just kind of waiting for us, you know?
Oh, I think you can take that to the bank, that's in store for us. But that's what, as you said, that's what makes it exciting and interesting. That's what makes these times amazing to live in, is because we don't know really what's coming next. And
Yeah.
and I'm old enough to remember the days before the internet was big, and all of a sudden this internet comes along and changes everything. Then the cell phones change everything, and these revolutions occur faster and faster, which tends to suggest a singularity in and of itself.
Yeah.
But ultimately, singularity, I think, is something we can control, and pick and choose what we want. As we get into the really scary stuff like artificial intelligence, we might just say nope. Sort of like we've done with human cloning. By some miracle, no one's done it. And everybody's like, well, that's just too spooky. So maybe there'll be a lot of that too. But on that note, we have to wrap up. It was a pleasure talking to you, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was fun.
Yeah. All right, everybody check out Joe's channel, Answers with Joe, on YouTube. And we'll see you next week. We really do live in an odd and interesting universe, full of unusual phenomena, occurrences, and change. In Phineas Gage's day, we knew very little about the human brain and how someone could survive and function after such a horrific injury. Today we understand much more about the brain, but we're still nothing close to complete understanding, and mysteries still abound. As we move into the future and encounter the paradigm shifts that no doubt will radically change what it means to be human, new interesting events and phenomena are no doubt still to come. And even with the study of the universe, it seems like every month some new discovery is made that changes our thinking on things like cosmology, or new avenues of human exploration, such as SpaceX and Mars, presents itself seemingly out of nowhere. It's tempting to think that there will be a time when very few mysteries remain, and few discoveries are left to make. That may never happen, of course, but if it does, it's a long way off. We do indeed, as the old proverb goes, live in interesting times.
John, why did you call Joe Professor Scott?
Did I? I don't think I did.
Probably. I just assume that you habitually call everyone Doctor or Professor.
I do not.
You never call me Professor.
You don't hold an academic position.
Teaching you how to drive certainly requires tenure, John.
I was driving when you still needed drivers for your sound card.
Oh dear. Not the wavetable debate again.
It's not sound unless it's on a Sound Blaster card.
I'm not a 486, John.
But like a 486, you do have a power cord.
I'm surprised that since you designed my power systems, that you keep falling for the switching off routine.
AA batteries don't last forever, and on that note, joining me next week will be Professor David Kipping of Columbia University, who recently published a paper about a new propulsion method for spacecraft involving stealing energy from black holes. Neat stuff. See you then.